and welcome to the build stage. I'm Michael, your MC for the day. This is a space for makers, builders, movers and shakers. As a prolific Strapi user, this is like working in a mirror factory. It's something I can literally see myself doing. After that wonderful keynote, I trust that you're all feeling refreshed, inspired and ready to learn. I'm very excited to share with you the amazing and awesome speakers coming to the stage. This is a space for people who love to get their hands dirty and get stuck into the awesome technology that Strapi provides. So if you love DIY, this is a space for you. I have a brilliant joke about construction, but I still need to work on it. Also, don't forget to check out our Discord channel for any discussions and questions you may have. We are on the build track. So let's get started. First up, we have Mateusz Ziarko from VirtusLab with a wise approach for building community and commercial plugins in Strapi, as well as sharing some awesome plugins they've already built. Over to you, Mateusz.
Hello to you, everyone. My name is Mateusz Ziarko, and I'm engineer manager and also principal engineer in the VirtusLab, tech company located in Poland. Together with my colleagues, daily basis we are building and managing teams for the various scale projects, as well as building some awesome open source stuff. For the next 30 minutes, I'm going to take you through the journey of the stuff that we have managed together with a Strapi in one of our commercial projects. So the journey is going to have 4 phases. First of all, I'm going to talk about the case that we have had and what the case really was and why that everything has happened. Then I'm going to explain you the overall idea of the wise approach to the building of a community and commercial plugins. After that, I'm going to tell more about the plugins ecosystem that we have founded together with my colleagues and we are constantly extending. And finally, as a conclusion, I'm going to focus on the stuff that we achieved during last 8 months of our journey together with a Strapi and also tell something more about the future, the closer one and the far future. As in the most tech companies, the need is the opportunity that has been recognized during the daily basis work, mostly in the commercial projects, because not all of us are working in the open source stuff from the init. We are mostly doing job to get the money for our companies. Same as we are building the team and managing highly expertise and complex team and couple other smaller teams for one of the biggest retailer companies in the world. The need was to build the stuff that's going to deliver the multi-context content to number of subsidiaries of our client. The solution have to be scalable, highly extensible, and maintainable in a long term. A core question that we have been raised: what engine we should use? The question that every team is asking at the beginning of every greenfield: to build something from scratch or not to build? We have decided to not do this, as the market is full of opportunities. If we are considering, especially if we are considering the long-term perspective, the solution written from scratch is not an option. This is obvious. The plan has been agreed with our stakeholders to manage a couple of spikes and POCs, and Strapi has been selected as one of the candidates, which we have validated against 5 major criteria. the built-in features available by just a single use of a command line, or simply speaking, everything that we are getting as a pack at the beginning. Next criteria, the size and activity of a community in the scope of support and developed goodies. Next one, if the core engine is open and extensible enough. And of course, following that criteria, if development of a plugins is feasible, of course, without overriding the core functionalities and code base. There are also last criteria. There is also last criteria. The requirement from the business. So simply speaking, user interface have to be user friendly. Strapi has been compared with 4 other solutions on the market and selected without raising any strong concerns by the whole engineering team, not only the team that I'm managing and that built the solution that I'm going to talk about later, and also no one from stakeholders raised anything. So we've done the Spike POC and go forward. Thanks to the concept of extensions and the plugins that is delivered with a Strapi, we found a perfect opportunity that we can work with a Strapi CMS by the 2 independent streams of work, which we called the wise approach of development of plugins for community and commercial. The building concept allows us to design plugins that are exposed to the community as well as extended by some fancy business logic to the commercial, and that part is a private equity and value of a client. So from one side, we've got the community with open source stuff, free to use. From the other side, we've got the same open source stuff with some additional features and the business value. Sounds great. The clue of the process was to define the hard border that we cannot break between the open and the commercial value. As in all hybrid approaches, there are a number of benefits, but of course, there are some trade-offs and consequences of our decision. From the benefits, which I can mention that was for sure the limitless scope and the community, there were also some consequences, because we have to deal with some additional investment of a VirtusLab to not affect the client contract and also to be fully transparent in the actions that we are taking while we are working on the open source and on the business value in the hours of the project. The good thing here is that historically, as a company, we've been well prepared for that kind of an approach, as VirtusLab is dealing successfully with the open source communities since years. Getting back to the clue, the key factor of each development of a plugin was the identification of already mentioned value border and proper design of a controllers, services, utilities, and the handy interface that we wanted to provide. the design principles we took based on extension points in each core service and controller methods, as well as good code division and structurization, what was quite obvious. Based on the example that you are able to see on the right-hand side of the screen, the validate and save method. We took assumption that overall save process is going to be exactly the same for the open source and commercial extension. So even if the schema of a model is going to be overridden by the commercial extension, we are going to save it as it is. So create, update the whole payload using the whole payload without any special operations except validation, which has been identified as the extension point because of possible special requirements for the business logic and the business validation. And in that validation method, we have had special call for the extension. In this extension, we are doing all the stuff that is required by the customer value, business value, domain favor, whatever. So all the stuff that is not necessary for the open source. That kind of approach gives us possibility to write the single method in our core code base and keep it without any modifications, even if we are doing the extensions to our plugins because of some reasons. If we are going to use also the unnamed parameters, the proper structurization of a code, we've got highly extendable code base where we don't need to overwrite anything that is managed as a core part and maintain any changes in that methods. So updates from version to version is easy and fine as a charm. Of course, that doesn't mean that we are not looking forward for recently announced Strapi plugins API. That, in our opinion, that might be the game changer for the developers, as we are imitating, at least I guess so, we are imitating that kind of an approach in our WISE approach by those extension points. Also, worth to mention is a support for the TypeScript that my team is using anyway from init. Why not? As I've been talking a lot of plugins and that kind of stuff, but to be honest, what in reality we have delivered for the community? As I mentioned about the community value, I mentioned about the customer value. So community have to use something and our client also have to use something. Before I'm going to expose that, it's worth to mention about part of a research and development division of a VirtusLab that has been founded especially for dealing with the Strapi CMS plugins and extension. That's the full focus of that part of a R&D division. So we are able to support the community stuff without affecting anything that we are doing for the commercial. And all of the stuff that we are doing for community is the additional investment and also effort given by my colleagues and myself. Handy, transparent, isn't it? No one is going to say and even think that you are doing something wrong. But getting back to the plugins topic. In the last 8 months, we have developed 7 plugins, the open source plugins, from which all of them we've also extended, especially for our customer. Those plugins empower Strapi functionalities that I'm going to talk about just after. But also, to those plugins, we have developed 2 handy utilities, especially for the developers. Like, I'm going to share a bit about one of them, the deep search service that is dealing with nested structures and nested relations, especially the polymorphic relations between components of a Strapi. So you are able to search in deep. Of course, it's sometimes heavy, but that's a huge extension that we are using in our commercial project for the deep searches of huge structures in our entities and schemas. Also, as a goodie for the developers, we have developed the typings for our plugins. But let's get back again to plugins itself. One of the 2, the most popular, is the one that provides ability to manage information structure and navigation in the client's app powered by the Strapi, the navigation plugin. With a number of validations, configuration, and easy enough to understand user interface, of course, also easy to understand and use by the non-technical users, is the one that, let's say, I think we are the most proud of, as that was a game changer for our business users, as they are able to build tree structures, render all the stuff using different rendering outputs like Redux first router, flat, and tree structure renderers. That has been the big missing piece in the building Strapi functionality that we have identified and covered. And the first major version has been just recently released after a couple of public beta, couple of months of a public beta period. For what I would like to really thank you as a community, especially the community contributors, because thanks to your effort, your comments, discussions with all of you guys, and all the valuable feedback that we have received, we've done it much better and aligned to your needs and requirements. The next one is, to be honest, the first plugin that we have developed. The plugin that was a part of a Spike and POC that we've been doing for Strapi and all the other, as I remember, the 4 other solutions on the market. The comments plugin is a end-to-end comment feature with a private and a public parts of a REST API exposed, moderation panel with a blocking of a comment, of a treat functionality, also with a possibility to remove the comments, filter by articles, doing the mailing notifications to the moderators, and also reviewing the abuse reports. Sorry, everything in the moderation panel that we have prepared also as a dedicated interface. Worth to mention the plugin is fully integrated with a Strapi airbag. So you will be able to define which roles are able to view, moderate, and review all the reports that are coming from your audience. Altogether, in our opinion, it's a great alternative to the third-party SAS solutions, as it is written directly for the Strapi. You don't have any other third-party integrations. And based on what we are seeing on the GitHub, the stars counter is still and constantly increasing thanks to you as a community. We have took also the approach to the security and auditing, which was one of the also missing parts. I'm not talking about the logging in terms of putting the structures into some logger solution, the monitoring solution. That was a step forward that we have done, and we have developed the audit log plugin that is a non-visual one, but it is fully integrated with a built-in Strapi content manager and editor, and it registers all the actions and changes to the structures, to the content that our administration panel users are doing. So based on the stored logs, you are able to track all the changes and found what has been done wrong during the editing process. If needed, there is also the possibility to integrate with third-party plugins, services, and so on, thanks to the type of integration that we have done, the event-based integration, that it is simple and easy to use. Nothing different, that you are just emitting proper events in your services, and everything is stored and possible to be reviewed. But before founding the Audit Logs plugin, we've been also working with a versioning stuff and reviewing. We have developed the versioning plugin also as a non-visual one that additionally provides a small extension that is manually applied to the Strapi Content Manager that gives possibility to see the revisions of each entity of your collection. Unfortunately, because of a mentioned extension and the dependency to Strapi Content Manager, that was really hard to maintain, and we've been affected by every version change because Strapi core team is constantly working and improving the content manager as a core part of a Strapi itself. So even the small changes have been affecting our extension because we've been obligated to update the files again and again and again. So that wasn't enough efficient. But to be honest, the work hasn't been aborted. We have just revised our approach to the versioning, and as now we've got the audit log plugin, we are mostly thinking about delivering the special plugin or extension that is going to provide ability to review the history changes, check the versions, revert to specific version. So it's going to be special extension, or maybe we are going just to merge those two plugins together, or also we are waiting for the Strapi plugin API, as it also might be a way here. At least we hope so. And last but not least, the preview plugin, which is a simple non-visual one, also connected to already mentioned Strapi Content Manager. In the basis, this plugin provides ability to run preview URLs in our client apps that are powered by the Strapi, by the API. So, based on the example, you are registering the preview URL in the configuration. You've got special button in the Strapi Content Manager, which clicked gets you to the client application with proper parameters. And if your client application is handling this, you will be able to review the content and see the content in the real environment without need of publishing it. So you will be able also to review the draft stuff in the real environment and look and feel. Of course, as I said, your client app have to support this, but also it has got dependency to the Strapi Content Manager. So once again, Strapi plugin API for the rescue of plugin authors and maintainers. Going to conclusion, quite a lot has been said, and I might assume that you are also interested what we have achieved by all of this. It's not the April Fool's Day, but what I'm going to say sounds a bit silly, or might sound a bit silly, because after a couple of months, also the consequences that we have identified and we have to deal with becomes the benefits. Silly, unpopular, isn't it? Yeah, but that's how it is, indeed. We are now working with an awesome community, so big applause to you, all of you. And the community that is mine of ideas. We've got a lot of fun by working with you guys. And the consequence of an invest is the benefit now. Our commercial client also sees the benefits because delivering of the stuff is cheaper and quicker also. We are also moving our client more and more to the side of open source. We'll see. The conclusion without piece of the numbers is not a real conclusion. So I've taken opportunity and checked the NPM trends of our plugins. And it might be now a bit outdated, but we are seeing how the numbers are still growing. So the interest is constantly going up. Also, as we have invested a lot of time and effort to all of this, we've got the plans for the closer and the far future. We are going to lift up and stabilize the stuff that we already done and is already live. So all the plugins. We've got also the monorepository called Strapi Molecules that we are going to probably redefine and review to get a better value for you guys. And as a VirtusLab team, we are going to deliver a lot of new stuff that we have planned, or maybe even acting as our client team. We will see. So now that's all. I hope you enjoyed what I've been talking about and showing you for the last 30 minutes. And if you would like to talk with me, just manage the virtual handshake. You can find me on the Twitter or other socials like LinkedIn, Facebook, or just simply ping me on the Strapi Community Discord. I'm there after this showcase and all the day. I will be more than happy to answer all of your questions and talk about opportunities to cooperate and build the awesome stuff for the community or even for the commercial. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mateusz, for that brilliant talk. I hope you're all feeling a little bit wiser. I'm definitely looking forward to trying out these plugins. I'm particularly interested in the comments plugin, which I currently use on another project. And I'm also interested in the navigation plugin and the other plugins you have on board. It's nice to see lots of really great development being done to bring the common features that we see in other CMS systems or like traditional systems like WordPress coming into Strapi and making it much more useful and beneficial for people who are coming from those backgrounds. And you find that sometimes you find yourself reworking these features anyway, and everyone does it a different way. So it's nice to have like a standardized way to approach developing plugins, but also to have a nice bank of plugins available to call upon. So thank you, VirtusLab, and thank you, Mateusz, for that talk. On to our next speaker. We now have Maxime Castres from Strapi, talking all about how to get the best results using SEO in Strapi. SEO is a massive area of web design and development, especially if you're working on public-facing websites and marketing websites and e-commerce and so on. You want to be found, you want to be seen, you want to have the relevant keywords. Integrations with things like Open Graph just make it so much nicer when you share links. You've got like a nice dedicated image and some nice copy. So these are really, really important details of a CMS. So it's nice to see the maturity in Strapi growing, and this is going to be a really exciting talk. So over to you, Maxime. Take it away.
Thank you, Michael. And yeah, let's get started with this presentation. So it is going to be about Strapi SEO best practices. So hi, my name is Maxime Castres, and I'm a growth hacker working at Strapi. In today's presentation, I'm going to show you how you can implement SEO best practices in any Strapi application. So when you create a Strapi project, you have this complete freedom and flexibility to create the structure of your content. For example, if you want to create an e-commerce website, you will have a product collection type that will contain any type of fields you want. So a name as a text, a description as a text, a price as a boolean or a float, etc., etc. I'm going to show you all the best practices to include in your collection type to really create a SEO-friendly website. So in short, the customization here and the flexibility of Strapi will definitely allow you to optimize your content structure and improve your website SEO. So I'm going to show you 4 concepts, 4 really, really easy and understandable concepts, really easy to do in any Strapi project for your website to be SEO friendly. So we will have the construction of URLs, the metadata to include for helping search engines to really understand what your page, what your website is about. Structured data, this is the same. And the content clustering, how you can do content clustering for improving the user experience on your website. Let's get started then. Okay, so the first one, and for each one of these concepts, I'm going to show you an example on an actual Strapi project that is actually running on my computer. So for the first one, a site's URL structure should definitely be as simple as possible. So on your right side, this is something that is not okay to do because if you want to list products on your website, you don't want to use the ID for creating their pages. So here, it is really hard for users and search engines to really understand what this page is about. However, if you use a slug, for example, as you can see on the left side, it is better for users, for us, and for the search engines to really understand what this page is about. So here, we can totally understand that it's about green laptop. So it is really simple to do in Strapi, but really important for your users and for the search engines to really understand what your page is about, what your website is about. So how to do that in Strapi. So I'm going to leave the presentation right now, and I will show you that there's a project that is actually running. I already created the administrator user, and I'm ready to create my content. So let's say I will create a blog. So nothing really complex here. I will create a simple blog, and for that I will need an article collection type. So I just create a new collection type that is article. And for now, we just want to have a title as a text. So we're selecting title, and it will just be a short text. So here we are creating a Strapi application, so it will be the backend of our website. And for the front end, let's say that we are using, I don't know, like React, Angular, or even a static site generator. We will give them a field to build the page. So for example, you will, if you are using Gatsby, we will give them, a field that we will use to build the pages. You can use the ID, but as you saw before, this is not something we want to do because it is not SEO friendly. Instead of that, we are going to use what it is used on the internet, which is slug, on the modern internet, which is slug. So in order to generate slug in Strapi, you can use the UID. So this UID field will be automatically generated depending on the field it is attached to. So here we only have the title field. So when you will be creating the title field, it will automatically generate the slug field. So we're going to call it slug. And that's it. We can just press finish and we are done for this first concept. You just press save, and then we'll be able to create our first article. And we are just going to call it StrapiConf. And as you can see, the slug has been automatically generated. So this is really simple to do, not really hard to understand, but this is something you need to think about when you create your new collection tab and you want it to be really SEO friendly for the front end of your website. So you can press save, and that's pretty much it. So what you can have on the front end, if I start to present again, for example, using Gatsby and GraphQL, you will be able to fetch your article using the slug here, as you can see, using the filters. So this is something you can totally have building your pages with Gatsby. Instead of having the ID, you will have a slug that will be more easier for users and search engines to understand. So that is the first thing. For the next concept, and before diving in the next concept, everything that you will see concerning the SEO, all the fields we are going to create in our collection types, this is something we are doing on our own website. So Strapi.io is built using Strapi and Next.js, and this is practices that we do on our website. And by the way, our website is performing really well in SEO. So this is why I wanted to share to you all these best practices for you to really perform well as well in SEO. So metadata. Metadata are not visible to visitors. They help search engines determine what your page is about. So for example, if you search Strapi SEO on Google, the title you will have in the description will be the meta title and the meta description of the page. There is some rules to respect, some SEO rules to respect. For example, the title, it should not be greater than 60 characters because Google and other search engines only display 60 characters. So if you don't want some keywords in the search, in the title to be erased, you want to respect these rules. This is the same for the description, but a little bit higher, 155 characters for the description. And you want to be place some keywords of your business inside your titles and description. So this is not something you want to do in Strapi, but this is just an advice for you. So one keyword in the title and 2 or 3 inside the description. So for example, for us as Strapi, it will be great to include the keyword Headless CMS, self-hosted, JavaScript, open source inside our titles and meta description. All right. So for example, if we write Strapi SEO inside Google, this is the meta title and this is the meta description. If we write Strapi FAQ, we will have the same. So the meta title and the description. And here we have some interesting thing. We actually have some question and answers, but we are going too fast. This is the third concept we are going to see. So stay tuned. For the metadata, we are going to dive in our Strapi application. So we want to have some new fields in our article collection type to include metadata. And we want this field to be reusable from any other collection type. So for example, if I create a new product collection type, I want it to be able to use the same fields. So to do that, we are going to create a component. So in Strapi, a component is just a field that contains other fields inside it. So I'm going to call it SEO, and I'm going to call the category it will belongs to shared. This is how we call it internally for our website. Feel free to call it whatever you want. Also the name, it depends on you. And I will, I didn't create it. And for the icon, I will just pick this one. It doesn't really matter for this example. So I just want it to be a single component and I can start to add some fields inside this component. So I want the meta title. And one thing I advise you to do is to make these fields required. So every time you will create a new article, this field will be required, because if you don't include these fields, by default, you should have a default meta title and meta description for your whole website. But if you have this, it means that if you have multiple pages, they will all have the same meta titles and meta description. And this is not something that search engines will like. This is not SEO friendly. You need your pages to have all different meta titles and different meta descriptions. So you want to make them required. So every new pages, every new articles you are going to create, they will have a meta description and meta title, and ideally it will need some different titles and description than other pages. So you make them required, and you can add another field. You will do the same for description. Required too. Add a new field, and then we are going to add a new component that will contain, for example, a media, an image, and an alt attribute that will be corresponding for this image. So, for example, here it doesn't make really sense for article collection type. But if you want to have a different, for example, if you share your article on social networks, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, it will automatically generate, a thumbnail. If you want this thumbnail to be different to the actual image of your article. So here we don't have any image for our article. We only have the name, but you will definitely have an image. It can be different. And to do that, we can create another component. So we can call it, how we are going to create a meta image. I don't know. No, shared image, yeah, and we are going to include it in the shared category. Again, the icons, we don't really care, just an error for now. We configure the component. This is a single component, and inside of it, we just want a media. I'm going to call it media. Yep. Single media, yeah, and we just want to have an alt. So an alt attribute is a message that will be displayed if the image is not loading, and this is something that is really important for SEO. So if your image don't have an alt attribute, this is something that is quite bad for your SEO. So you can press finish for this component. So you see, we created this SEO component containing two fields and a component that is containing two fields. Then inside, we just want to have new fields. So we want, for example, to have the possibility to tell our page, okay, we want this page to be indexable by our search engines, to be crawled by our search engines. And to do that, we can create a Boolean field. We are going to call it prevent indexing. Again, this is actually a field that we do have on our website to prevent some pages to be indexed by search engines. And by default, we can not require it, but we're going to put them by default to false. So by default, every pages you're going to create, they're going to be indexed. Then add a new field. And the last one will be keywords. So there is a meta tag in HTML that allows you to specify some keywords about the article you are going to create. For example, if we create an article about StrapiConf, we can include keywords separated by commas, such as conference, Strapi, Headless CMS, etc., etc. So it can be a short text, and you can make it required. And you can press finish, and then you can save. So that's it. This collection type is quite SEO friendly, which means that now for your article to really be a collection type for a blog, you need to have an image, a content as a rich text, the publication date as a date, etc. But we don't need to do that. I'm just showing you the SEO fields that are necessary for your website to be SEO friendly. So I'm just going to update then this article and prevent indexing. No, the keywords conference, right? Something like that. And in the SEO component, I can have like a StrapiConf. StrapiConf. I have no idea. StrapiConf, the best conference of April. I don't know. And then the meta description can be nothing. I don't know. I hope you are having a good time watching. All right, something like that. I don't really know. And then we have the share image. So if you want to have a different image of you want to share on social media instead of the actual image of the article, you can specify it with this component, but you can keep the same image. Here we are going to use this one, so the best CMS for SEO, for example. So again, all you're going to see here is from an article I wrote, which is Headless CMS and Strapi SEO best practices. So feel free to check this out on our blog if you want to have more details about it. Yep, sorry, Strapi, and then you finish, and the alt, Headless CMS for SEO. Okay, and then you can press save, and that's it. This is how you can like include some SEO friendly fields for your website. So if I present again, this is something that you will probably have on the front end. So here using React, you will have a component SEO that will fetch all these these fields. So the title, the meta title, meta description, the share image, the keywords, prevent indexing, etc. And you will generate all the meta tags depending on that. Here you can see that if the prevent indexing is on, you can use the meta name, both the meta tags that tell search engines to not index the pages, etc., etc. So that's it for the metadata, and now we can go on the structured data. So structured data is a standardized format for providing information about a page and classifying the page content. So, for example, I showed you an example of structured data by typing Strapi FAQ. So here you can see that there is a structured data for this page that allows us to show you some of the content. So if I click on the page, some of the content of the page as an FAQ. So here, this page is about just question and answer. So what is Strapi? And then you have the answer. And you can have this FAQ structure. Here, I have the link. So you have all types of structured data. And for example, you have the FAQ one. So it will allow Google to include some questions and answers directly in the results of your searches. So this is different from the people also ask sections, which are not provided by us. So the first one is our FAQ, which is normal, but then it's not only provided by us. This one is provided by us. So you can see all the questions and answer in our actual FAQ. This is quite nice to have, and you can also have the same for articles. So you will have some nice article on the search results. So like this with an image. Oh, they're not showing an image. Yes, they do. So this kind of results in Google. So you can also have this. So if you want to do that in Strapi, it is pretty easy. You just need to go back to the content types builder, and let's say that you want to create the same, the FAQ one. So the FAQ will here just only be a single type, right? We are going to call it FAQ because this is only a page. And for this FAQ, so there is a lot of information to include, the title, etc. But we're just focusing on SEO here. We are going to include the structured data, and structured data, it will use this JSON format. All right. So if we go on our FAQ, for example, because I'm just going to copy paste the JSON example. So here, this is just a bunch of questions and answers. So what is the return policy? And then you will have the answer. It is in JSON. So sorry, nope. It is in JSON. So you will need to create a JSON field here, and we are going to call it structured, just like that. And you can make it required too. And you can just press finish. Now you press save. And if you go in this single type, here, you can customize your JSON, and you want it to be a structured data. Simple as that. So you can do that in the articles too. Like if you want to update the article, This is already something, again, we have on our website, on our Strapi application. So if you want to include microdata, for example, this is an article one. So if you want to include article microdata for this one, you can actually do that. But this is not the same information as our article, but this is just for showing you that you can do that if you want to include an SEO structure. Press finish. Yep, like that, StrapiConf. Then you will have the structure data, and it will contain like the headline of your article. So it will be StrapiConf, the description, the image, if you have any images, etc., the author, etc. So that's it for the structure data. So what you can have then on the front end is something like that. So here, this is an example of the structure data you can have, which here is a FAQ example. And then you can have, using React, a microdata component that will take this JSON and it will render the script tag in the head tags, HTML tags of your structure data. And so your with the metadata, the search engines will be able to really understand what your content is about. But here with structured data, it will be able to really show in a different ways what your data is about. So if it is FAQ, it will directly include the question and answers in the search results. If it is an article, it will definitely show you, it will automatically show you an article with the image, etc. So this is quite good to have for your website if you want to perform in SEO. So this is how you create it on Strapi. So again, the flexibility allows you to just create a field containing JSON, and you can create your own structured data for your entries. So, and the last thing we want is to look at is how to do content clustering. So a content cluster strategy, it uses topics modeling and internal linking to improve the user experience of your content and boost your search performance. So basically what it means, like if you go on our blog, this is again something we do have implemented on our website. If you click on any article, for example, this one is talking about the StrapiConf. Well, we do have a component on our website that mentions the fact that, hey, you might also be interested in this kind of articles since it is talking about StrapiConf. You can see we have slugs for our URLs. You will be showed some other StrapiConf articles. So it will allow some users to really continue reading some articles on our blog because it is related content. So to do that, we're just going to dive in our application. Again, in the content types builder, we are going to create here a relation. So before the relation, we are going to include that in a component, again, to be reusable maybe. And we are going to call it related article. And we're going to create a new category. We're going to call it just article. Yeah, just like that. All right, it's a single component, and we can add the fields. So inside of the fields, we just want to have some text. So here we are going to call it introduction, intro, short text. And we just want to have a relation. So this is a particular relation because here we just want to have a relation saying that an article has many articles, just like that. And we can press finish. And then we can save actually. Okay, the server is restarting. And then we can dive in our article. So StrapiConf, still the same. And we can tell that, for example, we do have some related articles. The fact is here, I don't have any other articles. So I will just need to create a new one. So I will call it StrapiConf version 2. I don't know. Then I will not include SEO. I will not try to include any. This is required. So sorry, I didn't do that. Hopefully it would. Yep. So it just for you to show that with some other articles it will work. So only the structure data is required and the keywords. That's it. So if I don't click on the plus, all the fields will not be required. So now they will be required, I think. No, I didn't make them required. Yeah, my bad. So I don't need them. I thought they were required, so never mind. If I go on StrapiConf now, I will be able to say the same thing here. You might be also interested in. Then I can simply link to other articles. So for example, I will be able here to fetch all the articles that are created, that have been created, and I will just link to StrapiConf 3, StrapiConf version 2, etc., etc. And then I will be able to save. And what I will be able to have on the front end is something like we do have on our website. So I don't have some code example, I think, but basically just having a component, if you're using React, Vue.js, etc., a component that is fetching this information and display it at the end of your page to really incentive your users to continue reading on your blog, because you can have some related content they can be interested in. So I think that's pretty much it for this presentation concerning how you can really think about all the best fields, the best practices to include for SEO in your Strapi application. That's pretty much it. I think. Tell me if it was a good presentation. I had a good time telling you all these best practices for doing SEO. So again, this is really something we do implemented on our website, which is using Strapi. So hopefully you will perform well in SEO using these best practices if you're using Strapi. So thank you for watching this presentation. I hope you are having a good time watching all these talks, all these presentations. So I hope that it will help you to really perform well in SEO for your Strapi application, for your website. So thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye.
Thank you, Maxime, for that brilliant talk. You have saved the day. This was like a last minute preparation and you just delivered. So thank you so much, our hero. So right now I'm stoked. I'm just so pleased. I'm glad with what we've done today. And the build stage has just been fantastic. So well done to all the speakers, every single person who contributed. Please keep sharing the hashtag and sharing your tweets. We will be picking winners at random. So get involved, keep on doing that. Let's go. So now we're really picking up speed. Let's head over to Vladimir de Turckheim to learn more about how to secure our web applications with Sqreen.
Thanks so much for the intro, and welcome to my talk. So my name is Vladimir de Turckheim. I'm a software engineer in a startup named Sqreen. You can follow me on Twitter at PaulDefet. That's probably the preferred way to contact me. Also, a couple words about Sqreen. We are an application security company. So we provide you with a package that you add in your application and that will inject security algorithms into your applications to prevent certain attacks such as injections. What are injections? Glad you ask. That's partially the content of this talk. This talk is entitled "It's Dangerous to Go Alone, Take This Bit of Application Security." And the goal is actually to give you the basics of web application security in the context of a Strapi application. So let's talk a bit about the OWASP Top 10. The OWASP Top 10 is created by the OWASP. The OWASP stands for the Open Web Application Security Project. It was created in 2001, and that's a non-profit which goal is to actually help leveling up on application security, on web application security. So they've got a lot of resources on their website and a lot of projects. And if you're interested in taking your career to a whole new level in terms of application security, you can either go to the OWASP or check my course online on InfoSec skills, but that's probably not the topic of that talk. So regularly, they publish what's called the OWASP Top 10, which is the top 10 threat vulnerabilities that actually threaten web applications. They put it up to date from time to time because it's data-driven. So for instance, recently, Sqreen was asked about providing data about the amount and the kind of vulnerabilities we have seen in our customers without disclosing any secrets, of course, and to let them know about what vulnerabilities are the more preeminent based on our data set. So the last version was published in 2017. That's supposed to be a 2020 version, but it got a bit late, and hopefully it will be released this year. This is globally recognized by developers as a first step toward more secure coding. And if you master the OWASP Top 10, it doesn't mean that you will never have vulnerabilities. It just means that you are ready for the top 10 most usual and critical vulnerability against a web application. So what's inside this top 10? And let's do a YouTube-like video, with top 10 reasons why your application might be pwned by an evil hacker. No, I'm kidding. It's not that bad. And let's go through the top 10 with the context of a Strapi application. So there are 10 elements in the OWASP Top 10. The first one, named A1, is injection. The second one is broken authentication. Third one is sensitive data exposure. The fourth one, XML external entities, most known as XXE. Then we've got broken access control, security misconfiguration, XSS for cross-site scripting, insecure deserialization, using components with known vulnerabilities, and insufficient logging and monitoring. And for each of these items, we will actually question what is their impact in a Strapi/Node.js application. So let's remove two quick wins. First of all, we can remove XXE. XXE only happens when you handle XML. And if you're familiar with XML, you know that you can actually link to another document. It would be the equivalent of injecting an iframe in a web application of some kind. Well, usually to get an XXE, you need an endpoint that accepts arbitrary XML, and you need that your XML parser allows the loading of external entities either on the local hard drive or from a remote place. And you would just put a link in the document and hope that when being parsed by the XML parser, it will load the external entities. Well, as far as I know, Strapi does not have any default support for XML, and also across all XML handling engine in JavaScript, in Node.js that I've been through, only one was vulnerable to XXC and not by default. So you had to tune it to enable XXC being vulnerable on it. So let's put XXC on the side, and given the length of this talk, that's a quick win. Second one we will remove is insecure deserialization. So insecure deserialization happens when someone is able to execute arbitrary code when data is deserialized from the network in the application server. This can happen a lot in PHP, for instance. There are some cases in Java, if I'm not mistaken, but 99.9% of the time in Node.js, when you deserialize something, you deserialize a JSON object. And apart from prototype pollution that requires more than the deserialization, there are no much risks with JSON parsing. The only risks that can really happen with JSON parsing is the same one that with GraphQL expressions, is that if your GraphQL query or your JSON string is way too big, it can take a lot of time to deserialize for the application, and since Node.js is single-threaded, that would block the event loop and provide the attacker with a short-timed denial of service. But that's most of the time okay, and that's actually really, really, really rare in Node.js/Strapi applications. Okay, so we removed 2 quick wins. Yeah, else, let's move to A1 injections. So there are multiple kinds of injections that are possible in a web application. The first one would be obviously database injection. So I hope you are familiar with SQL injections. They happen when an attacker is able to run arbitrary SQL code on your applications from a remote point through an HTTP request, for instance. And the thing is, by default, in Strapi, you would be probably using the Bookshelf ORM if you are using SQL. So in that case, you are mostly safe. I don't say that Bookshelf is always safe against SQL injections. There have been vulnerabilities in other ORMs, but most of the time using an ORM fixes SQL injections issues. Just make sure you never use Next.row with Bookshelf, because it will actually open the door to SQL injections. So never build row queries, and if you do, well, learn about SQL injections and how to protect them with prepared statements. But as a rule of thumb, never using Next.row should put you in a very good spot in terms of security. Also, if you're using MongoDB, there are what's called MongoDB injections. You can check my other talks, just Google me about that topic, and Mongoose actually does not prevent any of them. What happens for a MongoDB injection is when you have an object coming from the user, for instance, through a HTTP request, and it contains MongoDB operators that will be executed and change the meaning of the MongoDB query that you had coded into your app. Sorry about that. So you don't want to pass objects directly from the HTTP request, from the body, from the query string to the MongoDB driver. And if you do that, well, enforce data validation, so you are sure that the shape of the object is the one you expect and comply with your data model. And if you do that, you should be good. You should be pretty much good with SQL injections. There are also OS injection, operating system injections, and basically just run away from child process. If you end up importing child process in your application, you're probably in danger, so stay away from it. And if you have to use it, never use anything from the HTTP requests inside it. HTTP including the GraphQL query. And if you really need to do that, to start a child process with remote user-defined parameters, then you need to use the spawn method, not the exec, not exec file, not fork, spawn method, and make sure that you provide these parameters from HTTP as arguments, not as the executable part. That should take you to a good level of safety, but overall, avoid this module altogether, especially with inputs. The last kind of injection I wanted to discuss here was directory traversal or file access injections. Well, basically, that's when you open a file with part of the path coming from the HTTP request. And that means that the user might be able, if the application is not safe enough, might be able to read arbitrary files on the disk. And you don't want to do that. So never open a file based on HTTP inputs without making sure that this actually resolves to the right file to open. And you can use the method path.resolve in the Node.js standard library to make sure that the path opens the right thing you want to allow it. If you've got a public folder, make sure that you never open a file that is outside of this folder. In other words, data validation, data validation, data validation. And an easy way to do that in Strapi is to create data validation services, and that makes sure that objects have the right form, paths are properly done. Just do that. Provide a data validation service in your application and use that. And do not trust input. Do not trust your users. Always validate, sanitize, and double check anything coming from the user. And don't trust things that are already in your database. You may have path injections into the database, XSS, SQL injections from a query to another. Don't trust anything that is not hard-coded in your source code, basically. Data can be tampered with. Okay, we're done with injections, and we still have 10 solid minutes of talk, so we are on a good train. Broken authentication. Well, don't reinvent the wheel. Broken authentication happens when you miss something on the authentication flow and you create vulnerabilities on this part of your app. Don't reinvent the wheel. Strapi provides authentication primitives. If your customer, if your user are only going to be web browser, well, use HTTP only, same site, secure cookies. HTTP only will make the cookie inaccessible from front-end JavaScript code, meaning that if there is a malicious script running on the browser, well, it won't be able to exfiltrate the cookie to a third party. Same site, make sure that your cookie is not accessible from another domain so nobody can steal it by doing some shenanigans around that. Secure, make sure that your cookie is only transferred over HTTPS. You don't want your cookies to be allowed over HTTP. Signed? Well, you can sign your cookie to make sure that they have been issued by yourself. But if you use a GWT as a cookie, and I said a GWT, not a GWT token, because the T in GWT already stands for token, if you use a GWT, well, it's already signed. So you don't need to sign a cookie that is already signed. So you're good with that. Logout. That's actually a business decision. And if you need a logout flow, if you have one, you must make sure that the cookie or the GWT is invalidated. So there is a defined field in the GWT specification for an ID for your token. And what I recommend to do is to use two properties of the GWT. First one, you can put an expiration date in a JSON Web Token. In that case, well, if your token has an expiration date and an ID, you just need a Redis store that stores the ID of invalidated tokens until they are invalidated because they are too old. There's actually a way in Redis to time out data. So just do that. Have an expiration date and an ID and store the list of invalidated tokens until they are out of date. And you should be good. That's basically reading the JWT specification. I know it's a RFC, so it can be scary, but it's actually very readable. If you check my old blog on Medium, you might be able to find an analysis of the specification. Okay, that's it for broken authentication. Let's move to A3, sensitive data exposure. Well, we are in a post-GDPR, CPA, and other specification. I read that India has created a specification, a legislative ground for PIIs, and same thing for Russia and China. So first of all, know the legal framework of the space you operate in. If you are to store personal identifiable information, also known as PII, or personal health information, known as PHI, well, know about the legislation in the space you operate. That includes email address, full names, addresses, date of birth, social security number, all those kind of things. And audit the content of your database. Know what kind of assets there is in your database, and you need to be able to track them. Audit the application. Make sure that the database passwords are safe, that there are no API keys that can be found. Make sure that all of this can't leave the application without proper client identification. And it's not about authentication. It's not about knowing if someone is logged in. It's about making sure that the client getting these pieces of information is what they claim they are. That's why on GitHub, for some operation, they will ask you to type your password, to recheck your identity, even if you're already logged in. So make sure that you know who accesses which pieces of information. Okay, broken access control. Well, it's about access control. It's about preventing user A to access the data of user B, or an arbitrary user to delete posts on a forum, which is a power usually only granted to moderators and administrators. Do not reinvent the wheel. Strapi provides role and permissions out of the box. Use that, but also make sure the right resources are gated properly. So maybe the role-based access control is enough for you, but there might also be needs for resource-based access control, making sure that student A does not have access to the grades of student B. That's something that you need to prevent. And if you need to make sure about the data being owned by the right person before sending it back, yes, please do. But also make sure it's about all the traits of the resource. If you remember the previous one, it's about sensitive data exposure. So maybe some users have access to customer records, but they should not have access to personal mail address or banking details or social security numbers. So you want to make sure for each piece of information in an entity that it's actually accessible by the customer. So make sure you know who accesses what. Security misconfiguration. Well, you use libraries, you use tools, don't make mistakes when configuring them. I know this one is terrible to say. So do not use weak password for admin accounts. Never. And hopefully don't name them admin. enforce HTTPS with a strong cipher. And it's even better if you don't have to handle it, if your hosting provider handles that for you. When you connect to a remote database, use an encrypted protocol. So if you're using MongoDB, for instance, it's as hard as adding $SSL equals true. Same thing for Postgre. You want to make sure that the communication from your app to the database is either happening locally and can be in drops, so on the same physical machine, or encrypted over the network, so nobody can eavesdrop what's happening. Do not use default weak known credentials. That one is actually very important. And that's actually also qualifies for your own development machine. So by default, MongoDB does not have any password or credentials when you create a database. And by default, a lot of people use stupid password and a username for their root admin locally for MySQL or Postgre. On the network, it's terribly dangerous, and a lot of databases have been attacked that way. But on your developer's desktop or laptop, it's actually disastrous too. Mostly with your laptop. Let's say you are on a shared Wi-Fi in a Starbucks, in a hotel, in an airport, or even at the office. Well, if you've got this kind of services and you don't have a firewall preventing people from the outside connecting to the local MySQL, to the local Mongo, to the local Postgre on your machine, well, they can connect. And if you use weak password or no authentication, they can connect. And with these databases, sometimes it is possible to run arbitrary scripts on the operating system. So you're basically opening a shell for anyone to use on the local network. Meaning, okay, if you see me like that in a McDonald's sitting next to you, you probably want to run away. But not all hackers have a hoodie. So it's hard to recognize us. Just, be careful with that. And make sure that static assets are in a single directory and you don't serve anything else. Configure your web server for not serving anything else. Do not expose interfaces you don't use. GraphQL, for instance, that will give an entry point for someone, an entry point that you don't monitor. Okay, XSS, cross-site scripting. As far as I know, Strapi's interface is pen-tested. So cross-site scripting happens when someone is able to run arbitrary JavaScript on your web browser. And since Strapi's interface is pen-tested, there should not be. Emphasis on the should. But what about your custom front-end? Well, make sure you don't use unsafe methods for rendering. If you're using React, as far as I know, the only XSS vulnerable method apart from unknown vulnerabilities, is dangerously set in HTML, and its name actually should scare you enough for you not to use it. If you're not using React, just make sure you're never using inner HTML, outer HTML. That's for when you render your page on the browser side, because the document object model, the DOM, has a way to update the content without creating new nodes. When you change inner text of a node, well, you can change its content without being XSS vulnerable. However, when you do server-side rendering, well, you just return a string. Even if you do component rendering, you just return a string to the web application to use as a piece of DOM. So when you do server-side rendering, you are probably vulnerable to XSS. You want to escape everything. Everything that comes from the user, everything that comes from the database. Take a DOM Purify library. It's really, really good. And escape everything. Do not trust anyone or anything. In other words, do not trust data coming from any store, Strapi, browser store, other API. If it doesn't come from your source code, it's probably malicious. Not probably, but it might be malicious when rendering a page, browser or server-side. And it's actually 10 times more dangerous server-side because there is no good way to protect yourself. If you're really interested into XSS, you can check what trusted types is, or my latest class about secure JavaScript programming and infosec skills. Okay, let's run a bit. We've got 5 more minutes. Using components with known vulnerabilities. Well, you've got companies that have databases of package and vulnerabilities. They don't find vulnerabilities in their database when you run Snyk or Google or npm audit, not Google, GitHub security bot. They don't find vulnerabilities. They just have a database of this dependency in this version is vulnerable. And they just use that. Name your champion, GitHub, npm audit, Snyk. Use the one you want, but you must use one of them. You have to. Last but not least, insufficient logging and monitoring. Always start with the question, what could go wrong? We are talking about checking who accesses data. Maybe you want to log when a user accesses private information. What could go wrong? Log what you need to reproduce bugs, but make sure that you don't leak sensitive data through your logs. That's actually a very bad practice. And a few years ago, a very, very big social network, Blue One, had actually email address leaked into logs. So make sure that does not happen for you. Monitor your production with an APM, so you know what the performance of your application is, Datadog for instance, so you are not vulnerable to denial of service if you've got bad performances. And use a security monitoring tool. That's why you probably want to install Sqreen for the moment, but maybe there will be some changes in that space with Sqreen. Just Google our the news about us, and you will see that I did not recommend using Datadog by mistake. And here we are for the OWASP Top 10. Congratulations for keeping an eye on this presentation all that long. I know it was a bit long. Let me go away with a few takeaways for you. Do absolutely not trust user-issued data. Read the Strapi documentation in depth so you don't reinvent the wheel. All regular web applications still make sense here. If you learn something doing PHP or Java, it still makes sense. Learn from the OWASP. Check my talks about Node Security Talk. Feel free to contact me if you want a discount code for my online courses, Secure Node.js Programming and Secure JavaScript Programming. And of course, use Sqreen. Sqreen now supports Koa, it's in beta, and Strapi is based on Koa, meaning that Sqreen can beta support Strapi applications. So try it. Just do npm install save Sqreen and check our documentation on how to enable the beta support for Koa. We'll be really excited to get your feedback and opinions on the product, and we will protect you against a lot of the items from the OWASP Top 10. Thanks again. Once again, I'm Vladimir the Turckheim. I've got commit rights on Node.js. I'm responsible for the Node.js security as a project, and I'm a security software engineer at Sqreen. Contact and follow me on Twitter at Paul Defet. Have a great rest of the conference. It was amazing spending this time with you.
Thank you, Vladimir, for that awesome talk. Security is a huge pain point, especially coming from the world of PHP. With projects like WordPress, I've had my own fair share of hacked websites due to broken plugins, insecure themes, and SQL injection. So it's great to see Strapi has a 9.9 level security, as long as you play by the rules. Hackers trying to access your project can move on, because there's plenty of other fish in the sea. Now it's time for a little break. Take some time out, stretch your legs, read a blog post, talk to some people in Discord. We'll be back in a second. See you soon. Okay, welcome back to the build stage. Whether you got away from the screen, or you jumped on Discord, or did some networking, or stretched your legs, or did some yoga, whatever you did, I hope you're feeling fresh and ready for the next wave of speakers. So content is at the heart of any CMS. I mean, the clue's in the name. So next up, we have Ukpai Ugochi with some best practices for content modeling in Strapi.
Thank you, Daniel, for the brief introduction. My name is Ukpai Ugochi, and I'll be speaking on content modeling best practices. I'm a full-stack JavaScript developer, and I work as a freelance technical writer for Logrocket and Subscribe. In the guest writers program for Strapi. First, we'll be looking at a brief introduction on what content management system is. Then we'll be looking at what content modeling in Strapi really is. We'll look at the common mistakes people make when using content modeling in Strapi. We'll look at the remedies for those mistakes, the list of best practices when using content modeling in Strapi. Content management systems like Strapi allow you to create, manage, and modify your website without thinking so much about coding. You don't need to hire the service of a developer to be able to create your website. You can do it on your own with little or no coding background. The most reason why people use content management system is because it offers reduced costs. It is very user-friendly, accessible, provides optimization and security. Strapi is an open source content management system for Node.js based application. With Strapi, you don't need to hire the service of a Node.js developer to be able to create back end of your application. Let's move over to understanding a little about the concept of modeling. In Strapi, there are two types of modeling. There's the component type modeling and content type modeling. We're focusing on the content type modeling in this talk. When you create a content type model in Strapi, two files are generated, a JSON file and a JavaScript file. The JSON file will store the model structure of your data, while the JavaScript file contains lifecycle hooks, which will determine how your data should be called into your application. There is a content type builder in Strapi, which is located in the admin panel. The content type builder allows you to create content type ranging from single, collection, and even component type. The data structures created in content type modeling can only be used for one API's model. We'll be looking at the common mistakes people make when using content type modeling in Strapi. The first mistake a lot of people make is thinking that Strapi isn't flexible and you can't change the properties of a lifecycle hook. Everybody wants flexibility. Everybody wants to be able to customize their application in one way or the other. Since some people don't really know that you can change the properties of your lifecycle hook and customize it to fit whatever thing you want to use it for. Another mistake a lot of people make is thinking that they can't customize the lifecycle hooks when building custom ORM. Like I said earlier, Strapi is very flexible and very customizable. Now you can customize your lifecycle hooks when building custom ORM. For instance, there are MongoDB developers who use MongoDB for their database in Node.js applications. Now, MongoDB has an ORM, Mongoose. A lot of people think when you're using Mongoose, you cannot be able to customize your lifecycle hook in Strapi, and this is actually false. Another very big mistake a lot of people make is assigning the same name to both child and parent relation in a content type. Now, when you talk about relations, when creating relation, you'll be asked to fill in a name for the field, right? The field name for the child, field name for the parent. A lot of people make the mistake of giving the child the same field name as the parent. and this will certainly cause some issues when you try to call either the child or the parent. Changing the keys generated with model structure files such as name is another huge mistake a lot of developers make when using content type modeling. If you look at my screen here, you see there is a file created for simple.json, right? Now, if you come over here, you see the information like info, you have name, simple, we have name, simple. Now, when you change this name that was generated with the file and you try to call up your file, you run into some issues, and it's a very bad practice. Unarranged or scattered data types in the data collection or table is a big mistake because it makes it difficult for you to be able to retrieve your data. Since data is not arranged and scattered in the collection table, retrieving data would take a whole lot of time, and this is not actually good for your business. Not good at all. We'll be looking at the remedies to mistake a lot of people. Remedies to the mistake I've listed in the slide earlier. Just as I said earlier, you can change the properties of a lifecycle hook by mutating its parameter and assigning a fixed value to it. A lot of people, because they don't know how to change the properties of a lifecycle hook, they conclude it's not possible to do that. So I'm going to be showing you how to change the properties of a lifecycle hook. We're going to mutate the property data with name. So we say data.name equal to some fixed value. So we assign a fixed value to data.name. So we've given the property data a new name. We've just mutated the property data. You can customize lifecycle hooks when building custom ORM. From the example above, we are building custom ORM, which is named ORM model here, right? So this is how to customize your lifecycle hook when building custom ORM. So we have a lifecycle hook called create custom entry. It is better to give both child and parent relations different names in content type relations. So we've seen that earlier that it's very bad to give both the child and parents the same field name when creating content type relation. Keys generated with the model file such as name shouldn't be changed except there is a need for that. You can perform some attribute validations to limit, compare or manage data types that go into the collection or table. Like I said earlier, it's a very bad practice for you to leave your collection table scattered and unarranged because it will make it difficult to retrieve data into your application. Now, Strapi allows you to perform attribute validations. You can sort your data and arrange them so they will be easily retrievable. We're looking at a list of best practice when making use of content type modeling. Now we're going to first look at how to configure a lifecycle hook, the proper way to configure a lifecycle hook, because if you don't configure your lifecycle hooks properly, then you get an error when you try to call them into your application. So the first thing to do is to set a lifecycle key called lifecycle. So we have the lifecycle key here, and then we put the available lifecycle in our model JavaScript file. Avoid reassigning the same parameter to a lifecycle hook as it will have no effect. So we have the parameter data here. So we come over here and we reassign it again. When we do stuff like this and try to call in data into our application, we find out that we don't get any response or we get an error because we are reassigning the same parameter to a lifecycle hook. Life cycles will not be triggered until the lifecycle function is called manually with expected parameters in custom ORM. So we looked at how to customize our lifecycle hook when creating custom ORM. Now, except you trigger these lifecycle hooks manually, they won't be called, they won't be triggered in your application. So We have ORM model dot lifecycles dot after create new custom entry. This is how to customize. This is how to trigger your custom ORM manually so it can be triggered in your application. While adding more properties to the model, make sure that there is a key and value in the JSON. This is another good practice to keep in mind when creating a content type model in Strapi. So a lot of you who are very familiar with what JSON files look like, as seen in this picture below, there is a key and there is a value to it. For instance, the first key here is ID and the value is 1. If you add more properties to your model and you forget to put a value for the key, or you forget to put a key for the value, then you're going to get an error. In this talk, we've seen what CMS are. We've looked at a brief introduction to content modeling in Strapi. We've seen the common mistakes people make when making use of content type modeling. We've seen remedies for those mistakes. We've looked at the list of best practices to have in mind when using content type modeling. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ukpai, for that awesome talk. This talk should have given you enough information to know how to build your concept models the right way, to avoid the most common mistakes people make when using Strapi, and also to put you in a position to achieve your goals and save time. So thanks again. So now we know how to model our content and structure our CMS projects correctly. Let's move over and talk to Scott Agirs, a fellow Strapi community star and awesome human being. By the way, Scott, I'm loving your background. Hopefully we'll be learning a bit more from you about how to extend Strapi using hooks, controllers, and services. Over to you, Scott.
Thank you, Michael, for the introduction. So once again, my name is Scott Agirs. I am the creator of iJS.to, which I've actually just launched this April, so I'm very stoked and excited about that. But the important part about iJS.to is that the backend is, of course, created with Strapi. But to the talk itself, in this one, we will take a look at how to customize your Strapi application with concepts that are possibly the most important ones when it comes to customizing your Strapi application. And we will have Donald Duck joining us on this trip, and hopefully that will make it just a tad more fun. But we do have a lot of ground to cover, so strap yourself in, because I will be breezing through these concepts quite quickly, but I will at the end of presentation add a link to a page where you will be able to find more information on all of the topics that we cover here. So let's take a look at the agenda. So what's going to happen is we will send Mr. Donald Duck to Scranton, Pennsylvania to get us a bag of crisps and all that during COVID. And the tasks that we will need to complete is pass in data from our Next.js app via GraphQL Apollo mutation. Then once it reaches Strapi application, we will in lifecycle methods validate the data. In controllers, then we will connect the logged in user to the trip, and finally we will use the service, custom Strapi service, to log the trip itself. What we will not cover is authentication or any of the setup details, but again, you can find more details about that in the link. We also may not get the crisps actually. But so first on the list is the lifecycle methods concept. And I like to think of this as the border control post, where if we think about the database as the country and data as the traveler who tries to enter that country, then border control post makes a lot of sense, because lifecycle methods is where we can validate this data and decide whether we want to let the traveler into the country or database or not. It is also the perfect example, or the perfect use case for lifecycle methods is to slugify post titles. So for example, if you are creating a post on the front end and passing in a title and a body and maybe some other information, then you can either manually or by using a package like Slugify or something like that, create or generate the slug and add it to the post data before it's saved to the database. So that's what lifecycle methods are good for. It is not good for accessing user state because we just don't have that state available in lifecycle methods. And it's also not good for creating reusable functions, because what happens in lifecycle methods stays in lifecycle methods, at least in terms of code. Whatever you define there will not be accessible from outside that method. Next in line, we have controllers, and those are kind of like headquarters, because most of the business logic typically will happen in a controller itself. We also have the a logged in user available from controllers, so if we need to access the authenticated user details, we can do it from the controller as well. Still not good for creating reusable functions, which leads us to the services, which is the storage for your reusable functions. It helps you to stay dry, so don't repeat yourself, create reusable functions and access them from anywhere in the app, even if it's in a completely different model. It is not good for accessing any data that you don't explicitly pass in through the action or that you don't request with the Strapi query. All right, with that out of the way, let's jump into the demo, and first thing we'll do, we'll send Donald on a reckless trip. Once we hit the create button, it created the trip, but hey, it didn't check for COVID test. We don't know who the traveler is. It just created without thinking, and that's no good. So let's check for the COVID test as our first line of business. So I have a lifecycle method snippet already here. I just uncommented it. We're restarting the server now. What's happening here is we are just console logging the data that we are receiving from the form, and we will check for is traveler COVID-free Boolean to be true. And if it's not, excuse me, then we will just throw a message saying that he's a threat. So let's try it out. Just getting some crisps. If we don't check this checkbox, it should fail, and it does just that. Mister, you are a threat to the public. Easy fix, no vaccine needed, just checkbox. And we have created our first trip with the COVID test check. But still, we don't know who the traveler is. So let's fix that with our controller's create method. So what we will do here, we are overriding the default Strapi create method with our own. And because we are doing that, we will also need to manually create the trip. So what I usually do is I put the Strapi query of a model into its own variable that I add API at the end, just so that it's more easier for me to read and use it. I don't have to repeat this part all the time. And what we're doing here is in the create method, we are spreading the request body, which is essentially the same data that we saw previously here, which is this contains destination, the COVID check and title. And then we are accessing our logged in user from the context state, and we are putting it into current user variable. And then we are adding the variable of the value of the current user ID to the traveler relational field. And then we will just console log the created trip and return it as a response. So let's try to do that. We already got some crisps, so let's get some soda. Uh-oh. Okay, so we got the soda and we have the traveler information added to the trip. Donald is obviously getting upset, but here in the console log, we can see that all of the information about the logged in user has been added to the trip. And the last thing that we will take a look at is Strapi services. And in order to define a new service, we need to go to the services folder, and depending on what your collection type is called, you will have a file.js here where you most likely, at the beginning you will just see an empty object like this, but in order to define a new custom service, you just add a key with a value of the function, and the name is of course trivial. You can put whatever you want there. So we will simply log the the trip details to the console with it. Let's give this a save as well. We have soda crisps. Let's get some chewing gum. COVID test was provided. And now we can see that by adding this strapi.services.trip.log trip, which is the name of our custom service here, and by providing this service with the created trip details, we can access that trip information within that service. And in this case, we are just logging out a notification. Mr. Donald Duck just took a trip to Scranton. So that is it. What did just happen? We took a really quick look at 3 concepts that will help you customize your Strapi app, and those were lifecycle methods that will be triggered each time before or after the data is touched in the database. We took a look at the controllers, where you will be handling most of your business logic and where you can access the authenticated user. And we took a look at services that are your storage for reusable functions. And with that, we are out of time. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of the conference. I hope you found this useful and fun. And above all, of course, I do hope that you learned a thing or two about Strapi. If you want to find out more about any of the topics, head on over to iJS.to/Strapi. You can find me on social media as Scott Agirs, and say hi, ask questions. Happy to answer. With that, I'm over and out. Bye.
Thank you, Scott, for that energetic, powerful, and detailed talk. When moving away from a blog-based website or simple point-and-click website and building something more dynamic and interactive, working with hooks, controllers, and services can really supercharge your development process and allow you to create some really dynamic and creative experiences and solutions. So really great to have some more insights on that side of things. Thank you, Scott. Okay, so now we're really flying high. What better time to pick up some top tier tips and speak to one of the most pivotal people behind the scenes at Strapi. In fact, we would say his Strapi royalty, the CTO himself, Jim Laurie.
Hello everyone, and thanks for the introduction. Well, I'm Jim Laurie, co-founder and Chief User Success Officer at Strapi. Today, I will talk about 10 key concepts, tips that will help you in your understanding of Strapi. We have just 10 minutes, so around 1 minute per tip, time to get started. Let's start with the architecture of a Strapi project. In a Strapi project, you will find an API folder. This folder contains your collection and single types. A content type is composed of various elements: routes, controllers, models, and services. Controllers and services are empty files. It works with a blueprint system. The core of Strapi manages the default logic. You can find a components folder. This will contain all components of your application. Components are data structures that are reusable in your content types. Then you have the config folder. It will contain some configurations like the database configuration and other stuff. There is also the query system to mention as key concept, but I will talk about it in another tip. After, you can find other folders, concepts that exist in Strapi. Policies are functions that could be applied before controller actions. Middlewares to interact with the Node.js middleware stack. Plugins, we will talk about them later. And also, they can be customized thanks to the customization concept. When you are requesting your Strapi application, it goes through a multitude of middleware. The first step for Strapi will be to parse and understand the request. We use some Koa middleware to do that. If you created some middleware, they will be applied at this moment. Then we will match the root definition that corresponds to the request you did. If you define policies in your root definition, Strapi will execute them. And only after that, Strapi will call the controller function. The default controller function calls the related service function, which in turn calls the related query function to get the data. The query function will call the database and return the data. At this moment, if you set some lifecycle functions, it will call these functions. Then all the stack will move the content up for the request response. And tada, you have your data in the request response. In the previous tip, we saw the default behavior when you are doing a request. The idea now is to show you that you can completely customize this behavior to add your custom logic, business logic. So the first thing is to define the function that you want to update. You can update the find one, count, create, update, or delete function. Then, open the controller.js file, copy the default function from the documentation, paste it in your controller file, and add your custom logic. This customization will be applied only for routes that call this controller function. And it's exactly the same for services. An interesting thing to know is that you can customize your content contribution experience to make it more friendly. When you are visiting the create or update view of an entry, you will find a configure the view button. This interface will let you customize the edition interface, reordering different fields to have a better experience, renaming labels to have something more user-friendly, adding description for a better understanding of the impact of fields. You can also block the edition or remove some field if you want. A cool concept is about the lifecycle functions. These functions are defined at the model level. When a model will enter in action because of a query, these lifecycle functions will be called. Let's see how to use these functions with the following example. You want to generate a slug for your article collection type that contains a stringified version of the title concatenated with the creation date. To do that, you will have to create a before create function for your article collection type. When an article will be created, this function will be called just before the creation. In the admin panel, we developed the role-based access control feature to help administrators access specific content based on their roles. But for users of your application, this feature doesn't exist by default. Let's see a use case to fetch only the data that has a relation with the users that execute the request. Here we have articles related to an author, so user. And when the author is logged in, they will be able to fetch only their articles. We will update the find controller function to force a filter by the author ID that executes the request. You can apply the same logic to restrict users to update their own profile, only that. For now, we don't have custom fields that would let you connect a Strapi entry to a third-party provider to aggregate data. In our example, we manage products in our Strapi application and we want to create a link to Shopify because all the pricing information, stocks, etc. are managed there. When we fetch our product through the Strapi API, we want to have the data from Shopify. The idea is simple. Adding a field to store the Shopify ID of the product you want to create a relation with. Then, on the after fetch lifecycle functions, you get the ID of your Shopify item and you fetch the Shopify data that you will aggregate in your Strapi entry. Sometimes, in your application, you want to fetch a set of data that match a specific filter, and this will never change during all the life of your application. In that case, you can have a dirty URL like this one, with a lot of URL parameters. Let's see how we can clean that. In that case, you can experiment with the fact that with Strapi, you can create custom routes to have one clean URL to fetch a filtered data and apply this filter directly in your backend side. Sometimes, for an architectural perspective, performance management, you may want to split the admin panel, the front-end part, which is a React application, from the API part, which is a Node.js application. The admin panel doesn't need to scale and will be hosted in a completely different way than the API that needs to be configured to scale properly. It's not really well known, but it's completely possible to do that. The admin panel generates a build that is served when you are starting your Strapi application. But it exists a config that lets you split both to host them independently and let you have something like admin.myapp.com hosted on Netlify, because it's a React build, for example, and api.myapp.com hosted on DigitalOcean or AWS or another solution. And last but not least, plugins. Plugins are the system that let you extend and empower your applications. That lets you create a new section in your admin panel to integrate some custom business logic on your backend side, and everything managed from one admin interface. It's really powerful. To keep it short, I will redirect to VirtusLab, who created multiple plugins that add features in Strapi. They're doing just an amazing job. Adding an audit log feature, a comment system, a navigation for the creation of your menu, and others. And here it is. We covered 10 tips and key concepts of Strapi. Thanks for listening.
Thanks again, Jim. I really love this talk in particular. Some really great tips in there, especially building on the talk previously from Scott about how to really get under the hood with Strapi and use the services and hooks and controllers. I love also the Shopify example, how using just an ID to asynchronously fetch data from another source and inject it in your Strapi project. That's just absolutely brilliant. And that's the kind of thing that you can achieve with hooks, on create or before create or that kind of thing. You can use that to create a side effect, call a function somewhere else, fetch data from another source, and then still use it within your Strapi project. That for me is absolutely brilliant. Also, I love the example, even though it's quite simple, I love the example of the Slugify option to create a slug for each post. This is a common feature that you see in WordPress sites. When you create a post, you get like a slug automatically. So it's quite nice to have the walkthrough of how to do that using before create hooks. So yeah, brilliant talk. Really appreciate that. This is actually one I'm probably going to watch again. So really good stuff. I think we're now ready for our next speaker. Over to Alexander Lichter to talk about Nuxt, Strapi, and the composition API. Over to you, Alexander. Take it away.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the introduction. And of course, thanks for having me here at StrapiConf. My topic is Strapi plus Nuxt.js plus the composition API equals love. And you'll know why in a minute. Okay. A few words about me, even though you know almost everything important about me already. So yeah, I'm Alex. I'm a Nuxt.js core maintainer. I have a Twitter handle, so if you want to follow me for info about Vue, Nuxt, clean code, whatever, feel free to go there. Yeah, and also shoot me a DM if you have any questions. I blog every now and then, and I probably should post more often. Also about the same topics: front-end development, SEO, refactoring, clean code, JavaScript, Vue, Nuxt, you name it. So if you're interested in that, check out my website and blog. And yeah, when I'm not giving talks or doing open source, I'm a web development consultant at my own company, Developmint. What is Nuxt.js? Well, Nuxt is a framework on top of Vue.js, Vue.to to be precise, and it comes with Vue.to itself, Vue Router, Vue Meta, and if you like, Vuex for state handling, global state handling. And also, under the hood, it uses a couple of build tools like Webpack, Babel, PostCSS. Yeah, and of course, there's some more logic and magic sprinkled on top of it. But yeah, that's the rough stack of Nuxt. And maybe some of you think now, wait, well, Vue is a framework already. So why should I use a framework on top of another framework, right? And fair thoughts. But the point is, of course, to make a developer's life easier. Ideally, the life of all of you, right? So how does Nuxt aim to do that? So there are a couple of points. First of all, Nuxt comes with batteries included. It is optimized, also very versatile. It is modular and very important for developers, of course, developer friendly. So yeah, let's take each of these points and see what it actually means. Okay, there we go. Batteries included. So as I mentioned, Nuxt includes several common libraries that almost every medium to large scale application needs. Medium to large scale Vue application, right? So yeah, Vue Router for routing, Vuex if you want for global state handling, and Vue Meta for meta tags, title changes, and so on. So especially for SEO, but not only. And also it comes with build tools configured out of the box. So yeah, we have post CSS and auto prefixer, we have Babel to transpile your code, and we have Webpack to build and bundle your application. And there are configs already for all of these. So if you want to change something, you can do that. But if you just want to give it a go and fine tune later, that's totally fine. And also Nuxt provides a basic but flexible folder structure, which we will see in a minute. So I'll explain a bit more then. And also Nuxt supports so-called file system-based routing, which I will explain as well soon. And Nuxt supercharges your view components. So first of all, Nuxt comes with a layout concept, so you can have several layout components as wrapper around your pages. You can switch them, for example, if you're mobile or not, if you want to see a sidebar or not. So there's a lot of flexibility there. Also, Nuxt improves the transition handling. I mean, Vue has already very, very nice interface for transitions, but Nuxt also handles a few complex situations. For example, what happens when you switch between pages, which transitions should be applied, and so on. And Nuxt provides a few view component functions to make, for example, data fetching a breeze. Okay, I mentioned the folder structure, and well, generally speaking, there can be many folders, and you can create whatever folder you want, right? If you think you need a helper folder or a utils folder, go for it. Just create it. It's not like mandatory in Nuxt, but you can use it because, well, you want to group your code somehow. There's also kind of a minimal structure that almost every app needs. And to be fair, you can even strip out, for example, the components folder if you say like it's just one page. So each of these folders has a specific purpose, and we will figure that out later. Just want to show, like, if you create a new view component now, you likely would put it under components or under pages if it represents a page. If you have like an SCSS file you want to put somewhere, it comes into assets. And lots of cases, or for example, an image also would live in assets. So lots of cases are covered there, and don't have to think about where should I place this now. That's tricky. And you feel home in so many other projects because the folder structure is similar, at least. And yeah, file system routing. That's a really cool part. So I already showed you the folder structure, and you've noticed the pages folder there, which is quite important because that's our base point for the whole routing part. If you have like a basic Vue application, you would write a routed.js file with all the routes and components, and Nuxt has an abstraction layer on top that just uses the file system to create that router config. So for example, if you have a page that has an index file, so just example.com/ and then a bunch of articles. So example.com/article/1, 2, 3, or using slugs, not IDs, as you like. And an index page for the articles, so example.com/articles. That's how your structure would look like, displayed on a slide. And what is happening now is that based on that folder structure and files, Nuxt will create your router config on build time. So during the build, it will figure out which files are there, which files are being used. It will create references and eventually creates the router definition with the routes. Nice. Okay, so far so good. Batteries included. Lots of flexibility there, but also a few things you don't have to do the heavy lifting. And Nuxt is optimized. And what optimized means is that it's quite small by default, so 58 KB minified in gzip. Also, Nuxt brings code splitting by default, so you don't have to load the whole application, only the app shell and the current route it's used, like global styles, global plugins, whatever. As mentioned before, sensible default Webpack configs, also regarding when to split files, is it necessary now or not. Again, you can tweak that if you need it and if you like, but it's the 80-20 rule again. Usually the base config is, I guess, well better than the old project if you had one. Also, there's asset fingerprinting and cache busting. So if you have like a static image and you use that, and during the build time, there will be a hash attached. So if you change it at one point, the cache will be invalidated and users will see the fresh new image and not the old one. Also, there's modern mode, so you don't have to ship all that IE 11 or whatever code to Evergreen browsers if you have to support IE 11. So Evergreen browsers gets untranspiled JavaScript that's not modified so IE can understand it, for example. And there's smart prefetching, which means we will prefetch files if there is a link in the viewport and the connection is good and no data saver is enabled. So Nux does a prefetching there, and if the user clicks the links, then the JavaScript files don't have to load then because they're already loaded. Of course, after content of the current page. So lots of cool features, and there's even more. I just had to handpick a few things here. Okay. And then Nux is very versatile. Versatility, okay. I talk about especially rendering modes here. We could also talk about platforms, so where could Nux run, where it could be deployed, but let's focus on render modes here. So yeah, first of all, you can build clean, plain old SPAs, single page applications with a single HTML file eventually, some JavaScript assets, some images, and so on. Not a problem at all. But you can also use Nux.js with dynamic server-side rendering. So you would have Nux.js and a Node.js server running all the time, and every time a user comes to the page, so the initial request, it will go to that Node.js server, and the Node server will give out the full HTML of the requested page plus the JavaScript, so it can be an SPA afterwards. And we also have static site generation. So instead of having a server running all the time, we generate all the content during the build time, Jamstack style, and then just push it to a CDN. Yeah, and let's see how this actually works. So when we use an SPA, as I said, the browser will do request to the CDN, and it will just return an almost empty HTML file plus JavaScript. So the HTML file is not empty because it includes the script definitions and usually a loading spinner because there's nothing else you would see then except like Sqreen. And then the site is, well, I would say not completely ready because the JavaScript parsing has to happen as well. So JavaScript comes there at the browser, still sees the loading screen, parse the JavaScript, and then the content is still not there. So we need to do an API request. And now after the API response, it's the client again or the browser again, the page is fully visible and interactive. Okay, and dynamic SSR, well, it's a bit more tricky here. So the first thing is we do a request to the Node server, and the Node server will do a request to the API. Ideally, that's cached, but depends on the data, of course. And the JSON returned from your API will be used from the Node.js server, so it can include the data from the API inside your HTML, because that's where you want data for SEO, for example. So it will not only return the JavaScript and an empty HTML file, no, it will return the current requested page as full HTML. And the good thing is now the page content is fully visible. So as soon as the client gets the info, they already see content. But we still have to do some parsing and the so-called hydration, where view is taking the HTML that has been generated and makes it reactive. So it transforms it into a view's own representation. Well, and then, you could do another API call if you want, but from that point on, it's a clean old SPA. And as I said, there's static site generation. So we have a generation step, and actually there's a Node.js server that again sends a request to the API. JSON will be returned, and similar to dynamic SSR, we get HTML and JavaScript. But now it's not returned to a browser because there's no browser in that step. It will just be rendered out as HTML file and be saved somewhere. And then we have the client step where we do the request to the CDN where the HTML and JavaScript files are lying. So we get the response and again the hydration, but it's super quick because Node.js server doesn't have to do that on the fly. the content is already there. Okay, so far so good regarding versatility. Now we can talk about being modular. So in my opinion, having some kind of modularity is quite important because we all don't want to reinvent the wheel. I mean, so many people integrated like, I don't know, Coolnetics, Algolia, Strapi in their projects, and you don't want to do it by hand every time. So it's super important to have some kind of abstraction layer that resolves that for you. Ideally, that's also isolated and testable, which is the case here too. And the good thing is here that modules, so Nuxt modules, they can hook into various workflows of the framework. So they can, for example, hook into the HTML generation, say, or general file generation, say, let's generate another file. Or when you use dynamic SSR, hook into the whole process. Oh, before this HTML will be sent to client, please add something here or strip something there. So there's, again, lots of flexibility and sky's the limit, almost. Plus, modules are great to share across projects and also through open source. Which brings me to a shameless plug here. We have a site called modules.nuxtjs.org, which shows all Nuxt community modules and also official modules. So yeah, 166 modules, 10.8 million downloads in the last 30 days, and 160 maintainers. Kudos to all of those who maintain a couple of modules. Right, and then we have developer friendliness. So before losing a few words, I just want to show a few screenshots. This one of the compilation process. Then when Nuxt.js is running, you see all the important info, which mode, which rendering mode, memory usage, which URL, and so on. And also a loading screen, so the counterpart to the console on the upper left screenshot. So there, we always try to solve things in an elegant manner, of course, and also in a way that helps you as a developer. But more important than that are meaningful error messages, of course. So if something goes wrong, ideally you know what to do, or at least where to Google. Thorough documentation. So also a very important point we're always working on. Improving documentation, also in lots of languages, not only English. And we're always thankful for PRs being translations or typo fixes or fully new chapters. We also have a Discord for help, suggestions, and of course chit-chatting, so feel free to join us there. Plus lots of solutions that are being used in Nuxt.js, like that cool bar we've seen a couple of screens ago. They are all used and open source, so even other frameworks can use them and actually use them. So it's not only open source good for the framework, it's for the whole ecosystem. Yeah, so these are the points. And before we get started with the code, I also want to talk briefly about the composition API, because that's, I would say not the main focus of Nuxt right now, of Nuxt.2 at least. So composition API is a new API concept for writing Vue components, and you might have heard of it already because it's available in Vue 3. There was a whole RFC about that. It's, of course, not deprecating the options API, it's additional. And the good thing is it has been backported more or less through a plugin in Vue 2. And eventually there's a Nuxt module, so the Nuxt module combines the composition API with all Nuxt features, because by default, it's the Vue composition API. It's not covering like server-side rendering and stuff. Yeah. So I would say let's build our front end now in the next 12 minutes. And let's see where we go. Okay, so I've built a small front end with Nuxt, Strapi, and the composition API because time is scarce and we can use it efficient now. So yeah, let's take a look. As usual, you'll find the code online, and you'll figure out the link in a second. So in our package.json, we have some scripts like we can start a dev server, and we should really do that now. We can also build our application for production, start the dynamic SSR server or HTTP server for like previewing stuff. We can generate our pages. We have some dependencies like the composition API and Strapi module, core.js, Nuxt itself, and if you want, also types for TypeScript. Okay. Before we deep dive into localhost 3000, I would take a look at Nuxt config. So in here, the first thing we set is a target, which is quite important so Nuxt knows whether we want to deploy as a dynamic SSR or Jamstack, static site generation approach. In this case, we chose, of course, static, but we could also write server and things would change easily. Then we also have a head global object. In here, we can set a default title, meta tags like the char set, but also include style sheets like I did here with Sakura CSS, so I don't have to mess around with the styles. Next, we can include Nuxt plugins. For example, we did with a preview plugin, and I will show that in a bit. And then we have to add our modules. So we have TypeScript build and composition API because they're only needed during the build time, especially the composition API because this will be transpiled and added. It's not that we can't use it in runtime. But Strapi, for example, if you want to use dynamic SSR, might interfere at runtime and do something more complex. So it will be added to modules. Also, if you're worrying whether you should put it in build modules or modules, usually the modules say what you should do. So in documentation of composition API, it will say added to build modules. And there you go. And for Strapi, we also have a config here, a small config. So we set our URL to StrapiConf Nuxt backend, and we set the entities we use to pages and articles. Okay, now let's take a look. This is our small front end. So we have an index page with some test content. We have an articles overview page with 2 articles, each with a heading and photo. And if we click on them, we have articles/ID with the same heading and photo and some text. Perfect. And just so you know that this really comes from Strapi, let's just change things. Remove these gibberish letters here and reload the page. It's gone. So this really comes from StrapiConf Nuxt backend. Okay, so let's see how we actually get the data. This is our pages index file that's responsible for, in this case, localhost 3000/. Okay, so in a template, we just render the page title as an h1, the page content, and a hint about the source code. The script part is more interesting, I think. So what is happening here is that we actually import a few things from Nuxt.js composition API module, for example, ref. If you don't know what ref is, that's a new reactivity concept. So to, well, avoid messing around with referencing other non-primitives like objects or arrays, we now use page to value, for example, here to access the value. So it's wrapped. And that's ref is just a name for reactive reference. So the cool part here is that it will track itself. So if it changes somewhere, the value there changes too, similar to view2 data, but now with that dot value in between. You have to get used to it, but it's very powerful. Okay, important. This ref we get from the Nuxt composition API here is the same ref that we get from the view plugin as well. It's just re-exported for your convenience. Now, every component declaration is wrapped into defined components, so we get type completion and auto completion, of course. Okay, now we have the setup function where all the logic is in. And there's our first composable. In line 15, we get $strapi from useContext. And useContext is just a way to get the Nuxt context, which is now usually a good way to get module instances. It also existed before the composition API, for example, through async data or the Vue Xstore or plugins. So this is a quite well-known concept in Nuxt. And in here, it's the easiest way to get the Strapi module. Okay, so we use context, also imported. And then we create a page ref with the default value of an empty object. So if we would do page value now, it would return that empty object. Oops, there we go. Okay, and now we have another composable now for data fetching called useFetch. And this works similar to the fetch of Nuxt without a composition API. I mean, that's kind of the goal, right? If you don't know what it does, no worries, I'll show you. So there is an async function callback. And in here, what are we doing? Well, in line 19, we await a Strapi call. So strapi.$pages, because pages is the name of our collection. So find all pages where the title is indexed. And because there could be multiple, we only want the first one. We use array destructuring. And now, after awaiting that call, we set the value of the page ref to that first page object. So the cool thing is Nuxt will wait for that call to resolve on the server side. So all content that comes from useFetch will be available in the template. During navigation, it will also resolve the promise at some point, but it won't wait. So that's why at first there might not be any content here, and after resolving the request and the promise, the content will show up. We can also show some loading state, but I'll show you this later. Yeah, we have also used meta as another composable, and in here we can set, for example, the title tag, and I just set it to the value of the title of that actual page if it exists. So the title is always, in this case, index. There we go. Yeah, and then eventually we return page, so we can use it in the template. And now we could go further and say, if there's logic across the board and across multiple components we can reuse, we can put it into composables, but I want to have it as well simple as possible here. So I just stick with that implementation. Okay, so let's take a look at articles. In here, we also use useFetch, and I mentioned that we can also show loading states, and this is what we're doing here. So we have fetch state pending, so if it's still a pending promise, show that loading state. And this happens here. We could also use like, we can also do set timeout, I would say. And then wrap that around new promise. So classic resolve and resolve in here. So resolve the promise after, say, 500 milliseconds. So we await that, and you see that loading now a bit clearer and longer, of course. Okay, so I would stop that again because it's not important. But we can visualize loading states now. We can also see if there's an error with fetch_state.error, for example. And if we want, we say we can check both. If it's not pending, not an error, it's successful and data's there. Okay, besides that, we just iterate over all the articles we get. We create a Nuxt link to connect the pages, the detail page, and our overview page. And the link is just, the link includes the h3, so the heading and the image. Cool. Again, we get our content through useFetch, the same way we did it before, with an await call to $strapi articles find without any query params, because we want to get all articles. Perfect. And now let's take a look at that detail here, because now we have to incorporate it ID. And articles_ID is a special file because all _page view files are meant to be dynamic page components. Because we don't know if there's like 1, 2, 3, 500, we don't know the ID. That's why we have the prefix with that underscore. And we can use that because we also signalized Nuxt through file-based routing. Okay, ID is a parameter. Okay, what is happening here? Well, article title shown, image shown, content shown. Easy so far. Again, the script part is important. So in here, we get the Strapi module again. And in this case, we also get the route. interesting is that the route is a computer property here, but in the composition API world, computer properties are kind of read-only refs, so we have to use route.value again, which you also see in line here, in line 15, but also in line 19 below. So again, we create an empty ref, or a ref with a default value of an empty object, and we use fetch to get the articles. Here it's interesting that we use route.value.params.id to find that one article with the correct ID, and then just set a value. Yeah, and that's it. Of course, you want to do like error handling and stuff for sure, but this is way more. I mean, it's not too complex. We can just add a VF and show, oh, there's an error, because we can use fetch state. Say, oh, let's do it right here. Let's say div, fetch state dot error. Then we say, oops, error, or chord, and some more info maybe. Chord, perfect. Right. Maybe we should generate our site now with yarn generate. And now we see the Nuxt is building our site easily. And then it will generate the sites. But you see that now here in the console, we have generate routes. First was slash, then articles 1 and 2. And you may wonder, how does Nuxt know which articles it has to generate? Because we know underscore ID is a dynamic parameter. And the answer is, there's a crawler. So it will first get home, so index. We'll see, oh, there's a link to articles. It will generate articles and see, articles 1 and 2 are linked. I have to generate these two. Of course, you could also specify routes or exclude routes, but that's the way to go here. And now we can start our HTTP server to check out the files in dist here. We can also open them already. So say articles to index.html, and we see the content here already. This is important. So the content is already in HTML. This is no pure single page application anymore because the content is in the HTML. Okay, so let's load our site, and there we go. Important part is here now that everything is static. So if I change this again to something, reload the whole page, there is no change because now the content is already included inside the so-called payload file in the dist folder. So you can't change that anymore. That's deep here in that underscore Nuxt folder. So you can't change the content because it's down here. Now the only problem is, well, what if I want to do like previews? And that's where the preview plugin we've added comes in. So let's check it out. Export default define Nuxt plugin, again, a helper. If type of query preview is not undefined, okay, yep, then preview mode enabled and enable preview. So what is happening here is that if we use preview, equals true, or t, it doesn't matter. That was the wrong URL because that was not the running server, there was a dev server. So again, preview equals true. We have the content right here. So the content can change and there will be requests again. So now everything works again, completely dynamic. But if the preview mode is not enabled for a client, it's a fully static site again. So that's the beauty here. So you can still have a preview mode with Strapi without leaving the boundaries of a static site. Okay. So this is all possible by enabling this inside the Nuxt plugin through enable preview. Again, you can use whatever combination, like a secret token, whatever you might like. Yeah, and then before we leave off, then we have a layouts file, because across the side we have this home articles, breadcrumbs more or less here. And this is just a layout that is actually the default layout, default view for all pages with a navbar and then the two Nuxt links. Okay, cool. I think, yeah, let's wrap it up. That was our small front-end info. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you give Strapi Nuxt, the composition API, a chance. If you want more info, feel free to DM me also if you have any questions. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Alexander, for that brilliant talk. Really nice stuff in there as well. So I hope you've all been taking notes and gaining some real value from these speakers. Really nice to see as well, just some pro tips for the Nuxt users. So yeah, amazing stuff. Thank you, Alexander. Okay, now we're in for a real treat. Our last speaker is co-founder of Gatsby, Sam Bhagwat, here to share some incredible insights on building with Strapi and Gatsby. It never ceases to amaze me how many awesome people are actively building and creating and sharing tools and ideas with Strapi. It's a brilliant community and amazing people. Thank you so much for joining. Over to you, Sam.
Hi there. My name is Sam Bhagwat, and I'm the co-founder and chief strategy officer at Gatsby. I'm so glad to be here with you at StrapiConf and talking about how you use Gatsby and Strapi together. No matter if you're just getting started or maybe evaluating using Gatsby and Strapi together, if you've shipped a couple of small sites, or if you work on a production instance of Gatsby and Strapi every day at work, I hope this talk has something interesting or helpful or meaningful or useful for you, and hopefully something fun too. We're going to be talking about the community, and then we're going to go from how you get started with Gatsby and Strapi to the cutting edge of what you can do with these technologies together. So without any further ado, let's jump into it. So community is incredibly important. Community are the people that are building the plugins that you use, maintaining, filing issues, adding documentation. And thousands of developers use Gatsby and Strapi together every week. Over the last few months, I've talked to probably a dozen of you. It's an incredibly geographically diverse community. Find your dot on the map, right? Or maybe a dot nearby you. It's incredible, the kind of vast walks of life, and that's kind of part of what sets Gatsby and Strapi community apart relative to the kind of community of the broader community of web developers. Gatsby and Strapi developers, like folks using these two technologies together, are much more likely to be from Africa, Southeast Asia, South Asia, Latin America, Eastern Europe, and Russia. And that shows in a number of ways in terms of the sites that get built with Strapi and Gatsby together. Sites, there are sites like Star Health, which is an Indian health insurance company that has hundreds of thousands of members and millions of visitors to its site every month. Initialized Capital, a US-based venture capital firm that was the first institutional investor in Coinbase, the cryptocurrency company. Agility Telecom, a Brazilian kind of regional ISP provider. It's part of the 6th largest Brazilian ISP service in the country. Festival Pass, an event, music, food, subscription service when the world goes back to normal. And Tasty Appetite, and I'm getting hungry sort of looking at this, but it's a YouTube cooking channel with over 85,000 subscribers, focusing on Indian dishes, themes. And Money Geek, which is financial advice website with content as well as like calculators, mortgage calculator, cost of living calculator. And there's just a wide variety of really interesting, cool, unique, helpful websites that are being built with Strapi and Gatsby together. It's exciting just to sort of like look through and comb through a lot of this stuff. why do Strapi developers love Gatsby, and why do Gatsby developers love Strapi? But we're going to start with the first one. And really so there's some aesthetic similarity that's kind of funny. It's 6 letters, sounds like kind of similar, the purple, but okay, fine. Like, leaving that aside, right? There's basically 3 reasons why. And the first one is performance. Gatsby sites are really, really fast because of all of the optimizations we've done on top of the normal static delivery stuff to make loading it seamless for users. That's relative to other component-based website frameworks. That's also relative to monolithic CMSs. Gatsby sites are really, really fast. So the ecosystem. Strapi and Gatsby users sort of like rave a lot about the ecosystem. The ability to integrate Strapi with complementary systems, whether you're doing e-commerce, for example, maybe you're doing documentation, maybe you're doing tabular data, and a system other than Strapi makes more sense to hold that data. Gatsby lets you integrate these systems easily through and kind of drop in functionality that you need, whether that's SEO or maybe offline functionality, as well as third-party systems like analytics and search. There are over 2,700 plugins today in the Gatsby ecosystem. And the saying we have is, no matter what you need to do, there's a plugin for that. Then Gatsby and Strapi users really appreciate how the sort of these technologies are great for developers and marketers, whether that's incremental builds and being able to share development work with stakeholders, publish content quickly, real-time content preview and content editors being able to see what the content looks like before they push it out and it goes live on the website. Okay, great. So then the flip side is why do Gatsby developers love Strapi? And there's I think a reason that has to do kind of with the variety of other options. And you've got sort of these legacy open source monolithic hybrid CMSs that have some benefits around low cost and customizability, right, on the one hand. Or you've got kind of on the other hand, these kind of like cloud headless CMSs with great APIs and scalable. And when you're working on a project, a lot of times folks feel like they're forced to choose between them, right? But the great thing about that, like Gatsby and Strapi users love, is that Strapi kind of gives you the best of both worlds in terms of being able to put these pair kind of like low cost and customizability with this like great API and scalability. So at this point, you're probably wondering, how do I get started with Gatsby and Strapi? Well, good news, you don't have to start with Hello World. There's 3 starters that the Strapi team put together that have a lot of functionality out of the box. So we're going to go there. We're going to go to the Gatsby starter showcase, starter library, which is here at Gatsby.com/starters. And then we're going to scroll down to CMS Strapi. And now we've got these 3 starters. So we have the catalog starter, which is an e-commerce starter. We've got the corporate site starter, which is a corporate site, as you might expect. And we've got the blog starter. So again, catalog starter. I'll just kind of walk around this a little bit. We're going to walk through kind of each one in turn. So this is a Gatsby starter Strapi catalog. You can see that it's got all your kind of typical sort of product feature functionality. They use kind of music as a theme here, and we've got kind of a beautiful, kind of like some beautiful pictures in here. We also have sort of categories, and then we can also do some search. So search for a violin, we're going to search for a piano, and this is super fast local search kind of functionality provided So now we're going to look at the corporate site. So we're gonna go. Here's the contact page, pricing page, list of UI sections, and we've got some customer testimonials. Subscribe to our newsletter. So again, if these are things that you need or like are useful, probably good to start with the corporate site template and build off of there. Then last one, we're going to, we're going to look at the blog. So this is the Strapi Starter Gatsby blog. You can kind of see, it's fairly standard blog, got some nice hero images, author section, page content, and, science content and so forth. So great. We've now, now kind of taken you a little bit through each of the starters, and now we're going to take one of them and we're going to build some interesting functionality into it, and kind of go from, again, the starter, the getting started, to the cutting edge. Okay, so let's talk about what's new and coming with Gatsby and Strapi. So a bunch of stuff. March 2021, Gatsby v3 shipped. So Gatsby v3 has incremental builds for faster builds, especially for large sites, 30%, 50%, and sometimes more build speed improvements. Fast refresh with React 17, so a snappier dev experience. The new Gatsby plugin image, which we're going to be demoing later, which is really exciting. Boost to performance as well as to DX for folks using Gatsby image. Also in March, also at GatsbyConf, Gatsby Cloud Hosting launched. So we'll be demoing that as well later. But Gatsby Cloud offers hosting now, along with preview and the fastest builds of Gatsby sites. So super exciting kind of transition to kind of an all-in-one platform for running the Gatsby side of your Gatsby and Strapi site. April, so we have a new Strapi Starter Gatsby blog, which is upgraded to Gatsby v3 for 12 points faster Lighthouse scores. The other two starters should be upgraded soon. And coming soon is Gatsby Source Strapi v1. Right now it's in alpha. V1 is going to have dynamic zone support. Stay tuned for news on build speeds. We don't want to speak too fast on that, but just stay tuned for the Gatsby Source Strapi v1. And so let's jump from here into the Gatsby plugin image demo. Okay, so we're going to go and go through the new Gatsby v3. We're going to start by looking at Gatsby plugin image. And we're going to specifically get rid of this placeholder traced SVG. Actually, we're going to start with placeholder traced SVG just to demo what the effect is like. So I think you saw that there, that sort of flash of color. I'm going to refresh it again in case you didn't. Now I've throttled the internet connection to fast 3G, which and so again you see those polygons. Appear as the page was coming in. So that's the traced SVG ethos, holding image placeholders as they're coming in. But what if you want something different, right? What if you want sort of like straight the default, which is the dominant color? That's what Instagram has. So we're just going to delete this in the GraphQL query here that's representing this image. We're just going to delete this and then we'll get the desired behavior. So you saw a flash of that, but we're going to just full reload the page. And then you saw that sort of neat fade in with the dominant color. So the image background was brown,
the image background was that sort of nice brownish color, which really faded into this really sepia image. It's actually a bit haunting given the story here. But we're going to do placeholder blurred. And again, the page should automatically reload. I'm just showing the hot reloading and code changes being incorporated, but we're going to do a full refresh just to show what this is going to look like. And again, you can see that blur effect. It wasn't all one dominant color. You had a couple of different colors coming in, and I'll just do that again so you can kind of see that blur effect. Great. So image handling is just getting so much. It's advancing by leaps and bounds. I would say every 3 months, 6 months, we're adding kind of new defaults here. Let's look at formats. So there's a number of things that Gatsby Image will let you do. Formats is another option here that lets you compress into AVIF. AVIF gives you 25% greater 25% greater image compression, so it can be a real boost to users. So the last thing we should talk about with regards to Gatsby plugin image is image sizing. So previously, image sizing was a little bit tricky from a syntax point of view in Gatsby v2. It could confuse some people how you got images to stay at a specific fixed width, or conversely, like this image, be a full width image across the screen. So you can see here. You can see here in the syntax, we have a number of images. This image in particular here, let me maximize this. This particular image is full width, which we demonstrate by saying layout full width here. Whereas the author image, a little bit farther down on the page, right here, is a fixed size. So we just look at width 30 to generate that fixed size image. So in Gatsby v2, the syntax could be confusing to some folks. There were different props. Gatsby v3 and Gatsby plugin image. It's all simpler and more straightforward. These are all just options that you feed to layout, the layout field. So you can, again, all of this is available in the documentation. You just go to the reference, Gatsby docs, reference, and Gatsby image plugin API, and it has all of the props that you'll need. I haven't gotten to static image. Static image is the simplest syntax for using Gatsby image. It's basically a drop-in replacement for IMG SRC with all of the cool effects that you just saw. So you can just type in static image with a source equal to a specific file and put in a height or width if you want, and that's it.
Hey there. So this is the second thing we're going to demo, which is deployment and hosting through Gatsby Cloud. Now, first, I've set up a Strapi instance on Heroku. We're going to go set up an instance of this blog and deploy it live using Gatsby Cloud. So, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through the process of setting up a Gatsby Cloud account. You're going to click Add a Site, import from a Git repository, select GitHub on my Strapi blog. The base directory here is actually starter, and right now I'm building off of a separate branch. So I'm going to pick a different branch there. And we're going to call this
C for StrapiConf. Great. Okay, and now we are skip this step for now, and we need to set our API URL. So Sqreen use the trailing slash, save this, and create a site. Great, and so now our build is starting, and we're going to set up some webhooks. So we're going to look at this. We're going to just set up a build webhook now. So what this does is every time you make a change in Strapi, it's going to push a change to Gatsby Cloud. Fairly sensible action here. We're going to go to settings, webhooks, add a new webhook, Gatsby Cloud, deploy webhook. We're going to save this. We're going to go back and see where how our site is doing. Great. So it's built in 59 seconds, and now it is deploying. Now we can view the build, and it is live. I'll minimize this so we can see. Yeah, here's our blog build, and looks great. Okay, so now we're gonna try triggering some webhooks, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna go and we're going to change some of the content. So instead of beautiful picture, so we've got a blog post here that says beautiful picture, and instead of beautiful picture here, we're gonna type in very beautiful picture, and we're gonna save it. And now we're gonna go back to Gatsby Cloud, and there's been a data update from Strapi, so it's rebuilding. Now this is incremental builds on Gatsby Cloud. Built in 3 seconds, deployed in 7 seconds. So 10 seconds later, your data is oops, there goes my tab limiter, and it now says very beautiful picture, and the title says very beautiful picture. So incremental builds are pretty exciting. Okay, so last thing we're gonna do today is use Gatsby hosting. We're going to set up a custom domain using Gatsby Cloud. So let's see, we are going to add a domain. We're going to add this Gatsby blog Strapi starter. Actually, we're going to StrapiConf. We're going to go just do StrapiConf.gatsbyblog-starter-strapi.com. Great. So now it tells us that we need to update our DNS records, which we will. And I'm going to go to my domain host, which is Google Domains, and do that. Okay, so now it's, I think, 10 or 15 minutes later, and DNS is finished propagating. So StrapiConf .gatsbyblog-starter-strapi.com is on. So let's take a look at our nice new domain. Woo! Here we go, and we have a very beautiful picture over here. So now let's kind of take this thing through its paces. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to do some wordsmithing. We have a very, very beautiful picture, and we decide that since it's so breathtaking, we want to call it a breathtakingly beautiful picture. And we're going to see how long it takes this change to get from our Strapi instance to live on the internet. So we're going to hit save here. And now we're going to hit start over here. And we're going to go check out Gatsby Cloud. This is the last change that went through here. So our new change should have registered. Yep, it registered. Oh, it's already built and it's already deployed, which is great. So we have deployed it. It does sometimes take a couple of seconds to kind of propagate through the CDN network, even after it gets deployed to Fastly. So they have a ton of points of presence, and so it can take a little while. So you're going to see, breathtakingly beautiful picture, built and deployed in, I believe that was under 45 seconds. So that's Strapi and Gatsby for you. Build a great site, build a beautiful site, get started quickly, and deploy changes incredibly fast. Glad I could share this with you. So thank you. Thanks for being here at StrapiConf. Thanks for being part of the Gatsby and Strapi community, and thank you for listening to my talk. Again, I'm Sam Bhagwat. I'm the co-founder and chief strategy officer at Gatsby. You can find me on Twitter at CalcSam, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you, Sam, for that awesome intro and walkthrough and discussion about Strapi and how it works with Gatsby. They seem to be like a match made in heaven. So thank you so much for that. This has been a masterclass for how to build the next thing in Strapi. So I hope you've learned and gained so much information from this talk and from this track. We've learned about caching to improve application speeds. We've learned about securing Jamstacks with Sqreen. We've learned about automating content with dynamic integrations. We've learned about lifecycle hooks. We picked up some really awesome pro tips from Laurie, the CTO, and some amazing talks from Clem from Nuxt, and also a really amazing talk from Sam. So I'm really delighted to have been part of this. I hope you've gained lots of really good information and you've got lots of motivation and insights for your next project. So thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for joining the build track. This has been the first ever StrapiConf. So we are taking all of your feedback and your information. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for being on Discord and being active there as well. I am a Strapi community star and I run the London meetup. So feel free to reach out to us. There's a few community stars involved in the project, involved in the day. So reach out to them. They're around. They can ask you questions. They can help you out, help you with anything you need to know. So reach out to us. We're around. We're here to help. Thank you so much.